Thank you, everyone. As she mentioned, I am presenting on behalf of Shintan Tarakia, who unfortunately passed away in December of last year. And I just wanted to quickly say that over the past few years, CIPHER had grown to be one of his favorite conferences. And he had done every single survey methodology across the board in this industry over the years. But since I've known him, I could tell that really what his favorite thing in the last few years was these probability-based panels. So I think he would have been really excited to be here today and to see so many familiar faces embracing these panels. All right, so what I have is really let's see if I can do this. All right, I really have two mini presentations rolled into one. So for the first part of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about panel satisfaction and some things that SSRS is doing to measure satisfaction. And for the second part, I'm going to talk about QR code use in recruitment materials and then what we're seeing within demographics in terms of use of those. So everything I talk about for this presentation comes from the SSRS opinion panel. It's a probability-based panel nationally representative of US adults age 18 or older. It's recruited via ABS and is multi-mode, so most respondents take surveys online, but we do have panelists who are either non-internet or who are reluctant to take surveys online, and they participate via live telephone interview. So for the first part, panel satisfaction, when I talk about panel satisfaction, what I'm referring to is basically how happy or unhappy panelists are taking surveys. So tracking satisfaction can allow panelists to understand, identify, and address areas of dissatisfaction in the panel's experience. That information can then inform decision-making surrounding survey design, panel structure, and just overall management of the panel. So going further, if we can understand panel satisfaction and collect a wealth of data on it, we can then use it as a tool to measure trends in satisfaction against things like data quality and panel attrition. So we started our journey collecting panel satisfaction data earlier in 2023, and we ended up designing a brief 3-question module that we append to the end of surveys. The first question asks panelists to rate their experience taking the survey on a simple 5-point scale. And then the second question asks panelists to just rate their overall experience on the panel. Then depending on their response to those questions, they're asked what we could do to improve their experience. So the idea is the first 2 questions give us this nice trendable data point on satisfaction, and the third question gives us something that we can act on. Then all the data from all those surveys is written back to what we call our survey history file and compiles it all in one place. And ultimately, the goal is that we'll have a data point on panelist satisfaction for every single complete on our panel for every single survey. So we started rolling that out as a pilot program on our omnibus for the first part of the year, and then towards the end of the year, once we were comfortable with it, we started rolling it out on all of our surveys. So what I have here is really just the tip of the iceberg of what we think we can do with this data. This chart represents a compilation of all of the web responses to that question asking their satisfaction with the survey over the last 12 months. So it's about 58,000 responses. The vertical axis is just some key demos, and then the horizontal is just the aggregate rating on that 5-point scale. And as you can see, the results are really boring, which is a good thing. It's what we want to see. So, if you can read it, that average satisfaction rating across all panels of 4.13, and all the other demos are really tightly close to that. And that's what we want to see, because if we were seeing like a certain demographic or a certain party had really low satisfaction ratings, that'd be cause for concern that something at the macro level is turning off panelists. And really quickly, I just want to point out, you might notice the top 2 categories we have on here that are a little higher than the rest are our Spanish language respondents and our no high school degree respondents, and those also happen to be the 2 groups that we pay twice as much to take surveys, so clearly cash is king here. And this is just that same chart at the panel level in general. Again, all the demos are pretty tightly close to that overall score with the people who are paying more high up top. And so as I mentioned, this is actually just a really surface level preview of what we think we can do with this data, and going forward we're working on using this and other data in our survey history file a handful of different ways. So to start, we're also logging the topics of every survey that we conduct on the panel, and that will allow us to break down how different survey topics affect satisfaction. We've also started using our virtual insights product to recruit panelists to qualitative work, and so we would then want to measure how that might be affecting panelist satisfaction going forward, either positively or negatively. We also, in the survey history file, pull in different standardized data quality metrics and different response rate metrics, and so we're really looking forward to tracking those against panelist satisfaction. All right, part 2, use of QR codes in recruitment. I'm going to gloss over this because we all know it, but QR codes have really taken off since the pandemic. It went from a really niche techie thing you need a third-party app for to something everyone knows how to do with their native camera. So in turn, survey researchers have started including it in their survey materials. So typically when doing a mail push-to-web survey invitation, letters will include a survey link and a unique passcode. The respondent would then manually go to that website and type in the passcode. But including a QR code can then streamline this a bit by allowing the respondent to scan it, and it can not only take them to this survey, but it could also bypass that password screen entirely by embedding the URL into the QR code link. So it's a nice touch because it's like one less barrier of entry for getting into the survey. So I think this is an example of what that might look like in a mail push-to-web invitation letter. And so for this, we want to take a look at who is scanning these QR codes on recruitment materials. And the nice thing is about with these is that when someone scans it, it actually writes back a flag to our survey data set and tells us whether or not the person who completed the survey actually scanned it. So we took a look at who scanned the QR codes during our summer 2023 recruitment survey cycle. And we saw that 49% of people who completed the survey had actually scanned the QR code at some point. If you take a look at that broken down by their self-reported internet use frequency, not surprisingly, those who use the internet a ton are more likely to have scanned it, and those who use it less often don't scan it as often. Looking at some key demos, for education, we're seeing that those with lower education levels are a little more likely to have scanned the QR code for entry. And if you look at age, there's a pretty big disparity. Those who are young are scanning it at a much higher rate than those on the older end. Looking at gender, we're seeing that females are scanning it a little more than men. And then for race, non-white respondents are more likely to have scanned it, especially Hispanics, where 65% of those who completed the survey who are Hispanic actually entered via a QR code. On a similar note, we're also seeing that for country of origin, those born outside of the US are a lot more likely to have scanned the QR code, and a whopping 85% of those who took the survey in Spanish had scanned the QR code at some point. So in sum, what we're seeing is that a lot of these really, these classic hard-to-reach groups, like young people, those who are not white, those who take surveys in Spanish, are gravitating towards scanning those QR codes. And while we haven't done any recent recruitment that does not include the QR codes to confirm whether or not this is actually increasing the response rate, it does show us that these QR codes are a good way of decreasing the barrier of entry for these groups. Of course, with that comes the need to examine just how these QR codes panelists are performing once they're on the panel. A future area of exploration for us will be to examine the correlation between the use of these QR codes and their performance on the panel, whether that be their response rate or other data quality metrics. And then in turn, seeing how that might affect representation on the panel. That's all I got.